I never really believed the creepy stories about the Appalachian Mountains when I was growing up. Especially not if you spent your childhood in a small town like mine, right on the edge of Pisgah National Forest. People used to talk about strange lights, weird sounds in the woods, creatures they swore weren't animals. But I always figured it was just something folks said to make life feel a little less ordinary. Now, at 30 years old, I can admit I was wrong. Some places really are different. What happened to me took place in the middle of winter when I was about 17. Back then, I had just gotten my first pair of glasses because my eyesight was starting to get worse. But I wasn't used to wearing them all the time. Most days, I left them at home without thinking. So my vision was always a little blurry, especially if something was far away. I want to mention that first because some people might think I was just seeing things. But I remember it clearly. Blurry or not. For my senior school project, I had chosen nature photography. Since I lived right near the woods outside Pisgah, I figured it would be the perfect place to get some good pictures. The forest in winter was quiet. Almost too quiet. Hardly anyone went out there. It felt peaceful but also a bit lonely. Especially on cold days when the sky was gray and ice clung to the trees like spiderwebs. Usually, I went out after school carrying my camera. I'd walk along the trails looking for animals or anything interesting. Even though I couldn't see everything clearly without my glasses, I was excited about the project. But that day, something happened that made me see the forest in a completely different way. I asked my mom if she could drive me into Pisgah so I could take some photos while we passed through the woods. Even though it was winter and most of the trees had lost their leaves, I still thought the forest looked beautiful in its own quiet, haunting way. I told my mom I wanted pictures of the trees and plants. Maybe some frozen streams or distant deer if I was lucky. She pulled over at a familiar spot right near a trail I had used many times before. It was a place I knew well. So she let me out while she waited in the car. I started walking down the trail by myself, holding my camera, scanning the woods for anything that might catch my eye. The path was easy to follow, and after a short walk through the bare trees, I came out onto the riverbank. In the summer, this spot was always full of people, swimming, laughing, hanging out by the water. But now it was empty and cold. Silent in a way that felt deeper than just winter. The river made a wide curve there, and you could walk along the rocky shore for a while past the end of the trail. I thought it would be a good place to find something interesting to photograph. So I kept going, staying close to the water's edge. That day, I was wearing a bright orange raincoat. It made me easy to spot from far away. Something I didn't think much of at the time. As I walked along the river and took photos, I noticed something sticking up out of the ground. A rusted railroad spike. It looked old and strange, like it didn't belong there. I thought it might make for an interesting picture, so I crouched down to get a good angle with my camera. But while I was focused on the shot, I suddenly became aware of how quiet it had gotten. It was a heavy, uncomfortable silence. Not peaceful, unnatural. Almost like everything around me had paused. No birds, no wind, no rustling branches, just stillness. For a moment, it felt like I was completely alone in the world. No movement, no sound. And that's when I realized how visible I was. My bright orange coat, my position out in the open. I had nothing around me to hide behind. I felt exposed. And then came the feeling, that deep, instinctual sense that I wasn't actually alone. I didn't see anything at first, but I felt it. Like eyes were on me, watching. A wave of fear hit me sharp and sudden. I couldn't explain why, but I knew I needed to hurry up, take the photo, and leave. While I was still crouched there, fighting the urge to run, I heard it. Footsteps. Crunching through the dead leaves and broken twigs. Coming from the other side of the river. Because it was winter, all the trees were bare, and I could see far in every direction. There was nothing blocking my view. So I froze, staring across the riverbank, scanning the trees. And then I saw something move. It was gray. Not the color of clothing or fur. Just gray. It didn't look like a person, but it was tall. Too tall to be an animal. And it walked upright on two legs. My breath caught in my throat. I was too stunned to move. Just staring, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It wasn't shaped like a bear. And it didn't move like a person either. There was something off, something wrong about the way it walked. I had never seen anything like it before. And the fear I felt wasn't just fear, it was panic. Deep and primal. It kept coming, slowly moving through the trees. Getting closer to the riverbank. Closer to me. And then finally, something inside me snapped. I turned around and ran. I ran as fast as I could, crashing back through the trail without looking back once. My only thought was to get back to my mom's car. Get away. By the time I reached the car, I was out of breath and shaking. I could barely speak. My mom saw my face and immediately asked what happened. I tried to explain what I saw, how I felt, that awful silence. Then she told me something that still gives me chills. While I was walking the trail, she suddenly had this strong feeling that something was wrong. She said it hit her out of nowhere, like a warning in her gut. She had just been about to get out of the car to come find me when I came running out of the woods. We left right away. Neither of us said much during the drive home. Even now, all these years later, we still talk about that day. We never figured out what I saw. Sometimes we try to guess. My boyfriend thinks maybe it was a skinwalker or some kind of animal I didn't recognize. But nothing we come up with ever really fits. Nothing makes sense. Part of me wishes I had seen it more clearly, or even gotten a photo. But most of me is just glad I ran when I did. That feeling, the dread in my chest, the weight of being watched, it was so strong. It still makes me uneasy when I think about it. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had stayed a minute longer, or if I hadn't noticed it at all. I haven't met anyone else who's seen something like that. But I do wonder, have other people had similar experiences? Maybe in the same area? Or other forests like it? Every time I go back into the woods now, I remember that day. And it always makes me just a little more careful about where I go and what I listen for. Story number 2. This happened back in 2011. I went hiking with 4 friends, Kyle, Jamal, Sarah, and Jen, deep into the Bridger-Teton National Forest. We were all fresh out of college and wanted one last real adventure before starting our jobs. We followed a marked trail for hours, then cut through a dense patch of trees until we found a flat clearing next to a narrow creek. It was a quiet spot far off from the main trails. Secluded. Perfect. But it wasn't untouched. Right at the edge of the clearing, we saw an old, weathered canvas tent. It looked like it had been there a while. The tent was zipped shut, and though the fire ring nearby looked used, it hadn't been lit recently. There were no signs of people around. We talked about finding a different campsite, but we were tired. The area was big enough to give space if the owner came back, so we decided to stay. We pitched our own tents about 50 feet away and kept to ourselves. That night, we cooked over a small fire and stayed close together. Around midnight, everyone went to sleep except me. I stayed up by the fire, just watching the tree line, listening. That's when I noticed the flap on the old tent. It moved. Not with the wind. It twitched slowly, like someone inside was peeking out. I stared at it, waiting. After about a minute, the movement stopped. The flap hung still again. I didn't wake anyone. I told myself it was nothing. Just my imagination. Then I put out the fire and went to bed. In the morning, Kyle was gone. His sleeping bag was empty. His boots were missing too, but his backpack and phone were still in the tent. At first, we assumed he'd gone to relieve himself or maybe took a short walk down to the creek. We called his name, waited, checked the trail, walked the edge of the water. But Kyle never came back. We didn't panic right away. Not at first. But something felt wrong. Kyle wasn't the type to disappear without saying anything. I couldn't stop thinking about the old canvas tent. The same flap I saw move the night before, it was now zipped up clean and tight, like it hadn't been touched at all. I walked over, slow and quiet, trying to hear if anyone was inside. Then I crouched down and carefully unzipped it. There were 2 sleeping bags inside, still partially rolled open. Nothing out of place. No mess. No gear. No people. Jamal had followed me over. He didn't say a word, just stood behind me while I stared. After a few seconds, I zipped the flap closed again. Neither of us talked about what I thought I saw last night. I wasn't even sure it had really happened. And with Kyle missing, the last thing we needed was more confusion. Sarah wanted to leave right away, but we convinced her to give it until noon. If Kyle didn't show up by then, we'd pack up and go get help. Just after midday, Jamal walked past the tree line behind the old tent. That's when he saw it. 3 short cuts in the bark of a pine tree. Deep and clean, like claw marks, but too even. They didn't explain anything. But somehow they changed everything. We stopped talking. Stopped trying to make sense of it. The mood shifted completely. By the time we packed up our things, no one even looked at the old tent. We just left it behind without a second thought. About an hour into the hike back, we spotted someone sitting near the edge of a dry creek bed. It was Kyle. His face was pale, his hands dirty, and his boots were missing. When we reached him, he didn't say much. We asked where he had been, but he said he wasn't sure. He remembered waking up during the night, hearing something soft moving past the tent. Then, without really thinking, he walked into the trees. He couldn't explain where he'd been or how he ended up by the creek. His socks were wet and torn, but there were no cuts, no bruises, and no signs of a fall. We walked together the rest of the way, mostly quiet. Everyone was just focused on getting out of the forest. At the ranger station, we filed a report. We told them about the missing hours, the abandoned tent, and everything we could remember. They took it seriously and sent a team to check the area. 3 days later, they called us back. The team found nothing. Not a trace of the tent. Not even the tree with the strange carvings. We showed them our photos. But somehow, the tent never appeared. Every picture ended just before the spot where it should have been. Carl doesn't talk about it anymore. He says the memory feels distant, like it happened to someone else. We never went back to Bridgerton. Not because we were scared, but because whatever was out there didn't seem like it wanted to be found again. Story number 3. This happened earlier this year. I had just turned 25 and wanted to do something different for my birthday. One of my close friends came to visit from out of town and we planned a one-night camping trip. We picked a remote spot about 3 hours from where I live. We packed the night before and left early the next morning around 4 a.m. The plan was to get there by sunrise, set up camp, and spend the day relaxing. The drive started out fine. The interstate was empty and the weather was clear. But everything shifted the moment we left the highway and turned onto the dirt road that led into the hills. It didn't happen gradually. It hit all at once. A sharp wave of pressure in my chest, like I had just stepped into something wrong. At first, I thought maybe it was anxiety or nerves, but it didn't feel like that. It felt like fear, but it wasn't coming from anything I could see or hear. We drove in silence for a long time. Neither of us said anything. I think we were both waiting for the other to break the silence first. Then, about 20 minutes in, my friend spoke. He kept his eyes on the road and said he had felt something too. He said he didn't want to bring it up but couldn't shake the feeling anymore. I told him I felt the same, but I didn't explain it. I didn't have the words for it. By the time we reached the campsite turnoff, we didn't stop. We didn't even slow down. We just kept driving until we reached the next town. We parked in a lot and sat there waiting for the sun to come up. As the sky started to lighten, that heavy feeling began to fade. And by the time morning settled in, it was gone. Everything felt normal again. That's when he told me what he'd seen during the drive. He said he kept noticing people standing by the side of the road. Not moving, not doing anything, just standing still. A few near the trees, some only a few feet from the edge of the dirt road. He saw them more than once. He hadn't said anything at the time because he didn't want to make things worse or sound crazy. I didn't see anything. But every time the fear came, I caught this strong smell of smoke. We ate breakfast at the diner and tried to reason it out. Maybe we were tired. Maybe the forest was playing tricks. Maybe it was just a bad stretch of road. It was easy to believe that when the sun was out. Eventually, we decided to go back. We still wanted the trip and we had the truck. So, if anything felt wrong again, we could leave. By the time we returned, it was late afternoon. The place looked normal. We parked and stayed near the truck, walked around a little, and ate something. When the light started to fade, we got into the truck, locked the doors, and leaned back in our seats. Neither of us mentioned setting up camp. It didn't need to be said. The night came fast and the sky was pitch black. Then it was past midnight when I started hearing something. At first, I wasn't sure. But after a while, I realized it sounded like a group of people having a conversation somewhere out in the woods. I opened my eyes and saw that my friend was already awake. He didn't say anything, and neither did I. The voices didn't move closer or fade away. I couldn't make out any words, but it didn't feel like an echo or anything natural. Then suddenly it all stopped. Everything went completely quiet again. That's when we heard it. A single scream, like someone let it out in 1 second and then it completely disappeared. It came from somewhere deep in the woods. And after that, nothing. I stayed awake for a while but eventually must have fallen asleep. When I woke up, the sky was starting to lighten and everything looked normal again. We didn't talk. We just started getting ready to leave. While driving back down the dirt road, I caught the smell again. It was faint and didn't last long. Once we reached the highway, it was like nothing had happened. We stopped in the next town for gas, then drove the rest of the way home without saying much. Later, I read about that area. There had been a sad event on that land long ago involving a group of native people. Some say strange things still happen out there. I don't know what we experienced. I don't think it wanted anything from us. But I don't think it wanted us to stay either. This happened in early January 2023. I had just started working part-time at a small movie theater in northern Illinois. I was 19, living with my cousin while saving up for school. The job wasn't much, just closing shift work. On my 5th or 6th night, I started noticing something strange. In Screen 2 under CD4, there were always the same things left behind. An empty water bottle, candy wrappers, sometimes a napkin or a crumpled ticket stub. No other seats had trash, just that one. At first, I assumed someone had switched seats during the movie, but after it happened several nights in a row, it didn't make sense. So, I checked the seating charts out of curiosity. Row E hadn't been booked at all that week. I told the manager about it. He said people move around sometimes. But I had been checking the rows before and after the screenings, and no one else had left anything behind. I didn't bring it up again. I just kept checking that row each night. I wanted to see if it would happen again. Almost every other day, I found the same kind of trash under that seat. I started checking the auditorium before the screening began and again after everyone left. Most nights, row E stayed completely empty. On a Thursday night, I cleaned the seat before the movie and watched the entire show from the back of the auditorium. Screen 2 was running the final show of the night. After the screening began, I moved on to other tasks. The building was quiet by then. A few customers were scattered throughout, but nothing drew my attention. Once the show ended, I waited near the exit corridor. People came out slowly, most heading straight for the lobby doors. One man stepped into the restroom across the hall. He had been sitting near the front. I didn't think much of it. 10 minutes passed. No one else came out. Screen 2 wasn't touched after that. The door was pulled closed. The next day, when I came in, the opener mentioned trash found under one seat. There was nothing to report officially, but it kept happening almost every day. The door sensors hadn't gone off. The cameras hadn't flagged anything. Yet, someone had been inside again. So, I stayed late again and Screen 2 had the last show. I checked the rows before the movie started and stayed out of sight near the hallway once it ended. The man in row A stood up as the credits rolled, walked out with the others, and stepped into the restroom across from the screening rooms. This time, I waited longer than usual. After some time, he came out. He didn't see me. Maybe he thought the building was empty. I watched him walk straight to Screen 2. Then he took something from his pocket and unlocked the door. Now, I had no idea how he got the key, but I didn't wait to find out. I called the police. Then, 2 officers with flashlights entered, walked to row E and spoke to him. He didn't resist or say much, just stood up and followed instructions. They escorted him out without any issue. They said he had likely been entering and hiding for weeks. Nothing was damaged or stolen. E4 hasn't had a single piece of trash under it since. But I still look at it every night before I go. Story number 4. In July 2022, I was working a tree planting contract near Smithers, British Columbia. Our camp was deep in the forest, probably an hour and a half up rough mountain roads. It was the kind of isolation that feels normal when you're working those kinds of jobs, until something reminds you how far from help you really are. We all slept in tents. Mine was set up near a group of tall, dry trees. I was lying down, eyes closed, just trying to fall asleep when I heard something, sticks snapping. It was distant at first, then another crack, closer this time. I listened harder and realized the sound was moving. 10 minutes passed, then another 5. Then it sounded like it stopped maybe 15 feet from my tent. I didn't want to unzip the tent or even sit up. So I just shouted loud, hoping to scare it off. What followed was complete silence. And that silence stayed. I listened as hard as I could, but it was like whatever had been there was gone. Then the sound came, something I still can't explain. I stayed frozen, waiting for it to move, expecting footsteps or branches snapping. But nothing happened. The silence just dragged on way longer than it should have. After maybe 20 minutes, I heard something else. And that's when it got worse. It sounded like one of the trees creaking, but something was off. I'd heard those same trees all week and they never sounded like this. Usually, the wind would push through and you'd hear a slow groan that came and went. But this one didn't move.